Oh look, another terror video. Like any of you care. Why aren't you talking about Godzilla?
Talk about stuff that we like. Don't talk about stuff that you like.
Spoiler alert though for this entire video. Normally I don't care, but because this show just came out and kind of the book just came out, you've been warned for both the AMC show and the novel The Terror. I've already gushed over the fact that I adore Dan Simmons' The Terror, and heavily enjoyed the recent AMC show. The last video I did on The Terror was about the Toonback, so go check that out if you are curious. Probably not, because all of you just like Godzilla and Godzilla only, it seems. Today, I'm talking about what I believe to be one of the big themes of primarily the book, admittedly, though it is certainly present in the show. This is the theme of communication and the lack of it, the failure of communication within the book and the show. And this hopefully doesn't sound like a rambling mess, because this is a very hard topic to tackle. Communication itself is a hard thing to discuss, despite the fact that we do this every day, and we have been doing it literally every day of our lives. Here's what I mean by communication in terms of this story. Throughout the book, we have those on the Franklin expedition trying to learn how to communicate with the Inuit-Lady Silence. We have crew members trying to meet eye to eye and failing to do so because of a lack of communication between parties, walls built between parties. We even have a lack of communication with information itself, like Crozier constantly keeping information away from the crew. That's definitely in the show. John Irving and Good Sir trying to speak with Lady Silence. That's in the book, and Good Sir in the show. An example from the show is when they find the bodies of the rescue party only 18 miles out from their ship. It's a wonderful scene, by the way. Absolutely horrific imagery. But that's a prime example. Crozier keeps it away from the men in order to keep their hopes up. And that actually comes to bite him in the butt later on in the show. There's consequences of controlling that information. This theme is much more prevalent in the book, and I can't say that enough because of certain character changes the show makes. The most primary example is Lady Silence is not silent in the show. In the book, she never had her tongue. She had it removed when she was just a little child, and it's very prevalent because there's a scene where Good Sir examines her and says how weird it is. It looks like her tongue wasn't cut out, but chewed out. In the show, there is a scene depicting her cutting her own tongue out to show her loyalty to the Toonback and taking her father's place. The show also truncates the character of John Irving and combines it with Good Sir. In the book, Good Sir was curious about Lady Silence and the Inuit, but usually agrees that they were just primitive savages. He calls them that several times in his diary. Every time in the book it goes to the point of view of Good Sir, it is from his diary, which is a great way to break up the monotony of certain novel styles, something that I'm doing in the Godzilla saga now, inspired by Dan Simmons and The Terror. But in the book, again, John Irving is the one who goes out of his way to find where Lady Silence is living and trying to communicate to her what the expedition needs to do to survive. I would like to point out that both do an excellent job on this front. What the show did with Good Sir was excellent. What the book did with John Irving was excellent. Both are great in their own mediums and in their own way. The show also beautifully depicts the scene with Irving finding the Inuit family traveling and them feeding him after they leave the boat. And Crozier openly says that the Inuit people are good people in the show. He doesn't have that opinion in the book. It's John Irving that knows this. And he goes out and he starts communicating with this family, and they feed him. They feed him seal meat, and it's like suddenly when he tastes it, he says he describes it as tasting absolutely horrible. But yet it gave him nutrients he desperately needed. And then what happens is Hickey not only brutally and violently murders John Irving, but the entire family. Of course, the scene is far more drawn out in the book because it's a book. But it's handled so well in the show. The acting is just phenomenal, and like how just crazy we see Hickey going, and the music as it drowns out the sound effects. We don't actually hear John Irving getting stabbed, but we never see Hickey actually kill Irving in the book, while we do in the show. This is all tied into the theme of communication. The book has someone trying to learn from the natives who live in the Arctic weather, their whole lives, and they thrive. Irving in the book is the only character that seems to grasp this fact. Even Crozier in the book, for the most part, says they're just savages. It isn't until later that Crozier suddenly realizes that not only that he actually prefers their way of life, and not in a cliched way either, like Dances with Wolves. It's handled extremely well. In the book, Crozier does not speak Inuit, and neither does Mr. Blanky, I believe, while in the show they do. This eliminated a lot of this theme within the show, the theme of communication and the lack of it. And it is this decision I don't exactly care for. I don't exactly care for the fact that Crozier and Blanky know how to speak Inuit because of how well it's handled within the book. But it's not the end of the world. The show still did a great job with what they changed and stuff like that. And again, it never feels like an insult to the book. The book shows Crozier to be more arrogant. Definitely be a more arrogant man because he refuses to learn from the Inuit. Again, he considers them nothing but savages. They are nothing but savages to him, and it ultimately leads to a lot of hardships on he and his crew. It's one of his faults as a captain. He does not go out there to speak with them or Lady Silence. He sends Irving to do it. And in the show, there is a bit of this with his impatience with Lady Silence, while Good Sir is going about it the right way by taking it slow and easy, letting Lady Silence gain their trust, while Crozier just is punching right through it. It's a great scene, by the way. That's a fantastic scene in the show. The show changes the entire ending from the book as well, and the book's ending is the epitome of the theme of communication. Crozier and Lady Silence learn to communicate with each other so well, they don't need to speak at all. In fact, Crozier never learns their language, never learns Inuit, and he even cuts out his own tongue to appease the Toonback, so he can't speak at all. It's a really good scene. It is described as if they have a telepathic connection, Crozier and Lady Silence, and there's themes in the book that hint that Crozier has some telepathic powers. It's only mentioned in a couple scenes, and it can even be chopped up to the fact that he was going through his fever dream while kicking his alcohol addiction. He becomes happier because he finally breaks down the walls between him and Lady Silence, and even between their two languages, by ironically eliminating them both. I think that it's genius, and it's a shame that the show did not do this. I also think it's a shame that we learn Lady Silence's real name in the show. In the book, I believe, we never learn her name right from the get-go. It's always been Lady Silence. I think it could have been an entire episode depicting the shift in character and his completion of Crozier's character arc, which is still relatively the same in the show. I want to maintain that as well. We have the lack of communication in the beginning between Fitzjames and Crozier. This is beautifully handled and represented in the show, with them both constantly at each other's backs, towards the first half of the season, having other people communicate for them, which loses a bit of the message each time. When you have somebody else speaking for you, you lose a bit of the message. It's like a horrible game of telephone. It isn't until Crozier realizes how bad everything is when he sees his friend Blanky lose a leg that he decides to sober up, and that breaches the gap between Fitzjames and Crozier. Both of the men, I think, realize that there can't be any walls between them if they want any chance at all, no matter how slim, to survive this horrible situation trapped in the Arctic. When Crozier says that he is going to be ill in order to sober up, this happens in the book as well. The respect on Fitzjames's face, this is great acting. Fantastic acting, great directing too, just great everything. It is the moment when the walls between them finally begin to crumble and they start becoming a unit. And they were fantastic as a team. They were always bouncing ideas off of each other. They were constantly working with each other, and even by the end calling each other brothers. It's a great line in the show that I love, where Fitzjames is succumbing to an infection, which is not how he dies in the book, but it's still handled really well in the show, and I like it in the show. And while they're pulling the sled along, Crozier goes over and speaks to Fitzjames and Fitzjames is like, "I'm so sorry," and Crozier's like, "You're full of holes, my friend." You're lucky you're walking at all. And I love that scene. It just shows their friendship. Going back to Crozier, it is Crozier's lack of communication that leads to the mutiny out on the ice. This is handled in both the show and the book pretty similarly. If he had just spoken to his men and been honest with them right from the get-go, they probably would have stayed together as a whole. There probably would have been a little more distaste, but they would have realized that he's being honest with them and he's telling them their situation. It kind of gives them a kick in the ass to keep moving. Hickey, in all of his terribleness, certainly wouldn't have gotten the traction he did, because Hickey relied on mistrust of Crozier specifically. And what's great about both the book and the show is that we understand why Crozier makes a decision he does. It just isn't a dumb mistake. We understand why he's making this decision. It's so that the men don't lose hope or faith in finding rescue, though the opposite effect happens because they think the captain is keeping information from them. Therefore, they lose their trust because of Crozier's decision to keep certain information from them, a lack of communication. The reason Hickey, in both the book and the show, he's handled extremely well in both, is able to gain all those around him, to gain traction, is because Hickey knew how to properly manipulate communication-words to service him. He gets down and personal with those around him. He learns who they are. He appears to be their friend, even though he isn't. He's the total opposite. The way how he talks to you makes you think the opposite. While Crozier is only like this to those within his innermost circle, and is far more authoritative in his approach. Typical commander is actually how he works. Which doesn't work for everyone, especially in this horrible, horrible situation. And it is ironic because those that Crozier does get personal with all adore him to no end, to the point most even swear their loyalty to him. In the show, we have his assistant, who just thinks the world of Crozier right from the get-go. And the admiration on him when Crozier says, "I'm going to sober up too," is extremely well handled. The actor did a fantastic job. And it's so sad because this is genius. This, I don't believe, is in the book. I know the character is, but it's not handled this way in the book. This is something in the show that I like more than in the book. It's sad because we have Crozier's assistant who just thinks the world of Crozier, and he thinks Crozier is abandoning him and breaking his word of not leaving anyone who is alive behind, no matter how sick. Because suddenly he crawls out of the tent. You see, I remember this part in the book, but I can't remember if it's his character or not. He's crawling out of the tent, the assistant, and all he can see or picture in his fever is Crozier with all this wine and extravagant eating, and he's just living his life, and he feels abandoned by Crozier. And it's really sad because in reality, Crozier has been taken captive and had no hand in the decision of the crew leaving the sick behind. And it's really sad. And then when Crozier returns and holds his assistant, who had died of exposure and or scurvy or whatever, it's so beautifully done. And by beautiful, I mean it's tragic, because Crozier had no hand in that, and his assistant died thinking he did. And that's really tragic. It's fantastic acting. During the Carnival sequence in both the book and the show, a lot of people needlessly die when the fires start. And to add insult to injury, in the book, the Toonback shows up on top of it. All communication is thrown out the window because it's a mass panic. Panic takes complete control, and a lot of people die for no reason at all other than the panic of the moment, the heat of the moment. When they had if they had listened to Fitzjames or Crozier or even Hickey telling them to get back as he cuts through the silk, more people would have lived. Jumping to the beginning of the show and the book, Go for Broke, I believe. I love that line. We have John Franklin, played by my favorite actor of all time, refusing to hear Mr. Blanky and especially Crozier because of past experiences and a bit of arrogance. If Franklin had listened to Crozier then they never would have gotten trapped in the ice. But because there were walls between them all, the communication between them soured, and well, they all died. There is a distinctive pattern here within the Terror of walls between people halting proper communication, language barriers, arrogance of the British, thinking the Inuit are savages, even though they live in the Arctic. And in the end, the only character to live out of all the expedition members is the one who finally circumvents communication barriers altogether by cutting out his own damn tongue. Certainly, that's a severe example, but it's so beautifully done in the book, and it fits so well with Crozier's character and ultimate rebirth. There are literally hundreds of examples of this theme of communication within the Terror, and I couldn't possibly list them all. And all I can say is read the damn book. Read the damn book, listen to the audio unabridged on YouTube. It's for free. Listen to it or whatever. Just read it. And then watch the show. Watch the show after. So in the end, go on Facebook, like AN Productions for more information of what we're doing. Hit the subscribe button, follow our website. And in the end, this is Adam Noyce of AN Productions saying sayonara.